Found. In this case, not so much as says it as tweets it. In January of last year, Alexander Leon wrote, "Queer people don't show up as ourselves. We grow up playing a version of ourselves that sacrifices authenticity to minimize humiliation and prejudice. The massive task of our adult lives is to unpick which parts of us are truly ourselves and which parts we've created to protect us." Alexander Leon, he wasn't known as a prolific writer or a philosopher. He simply tweeted a truth that's so universal that it spread across the internet like a wildfire. His truth, which was prolific, resonated because it's a shared truth, a reality that we can't be born who we were born as, that we can't be who we were born as, and that we actually might not survive if we were to be our true selves. Playing a version of ourselves, that's what Alexander Leon called it, while James Baldwin called it a mask in the reading. This subterfuge that we deploy simply to exist goes by many names, but it actually boils down to just this: who am I? This morning, I'm asking, do you feel like you know who you truly are? I'm not talking about the groomed or carefully coiffed version of yourself that perhaps I've met, but what I'm talking about is the version of you that's been embarrassed, the version of you that may have done a bad thing, or maybe has skeletons in the closet that haunt your ego at night. I want to know if you know them, the underneath version of you behind those masks, and I want to see if you can embrace that most profound and most authentic self. More importantly, I want to know if you will share them with me. I want to know if you will let me embrace them with you. You see, I want to know you. By the time I finish this sermon, I really hope that you realize that no matter what shame you have on your heart, that you are loved and you are welcome here at UUCA. I should know, because when it comes to shame and being not only accepted, but loved harder because of it, well, I'm the living proof. So with testimony wrapped in a sermon, allow me to introduce the original me before I started creating my masks. I grew up in the middle of nowhere. Well, Bradford, Arkansas, it isn't exactly nowhere. It's on the railroad between Bald Knob and Possum Grape, Arkansas, which is to say it is somewhere out of the way, tucked between the Mississippi alluvial plain and the Ozarks. Bradford is so small that I graduated with 26 people in this town where the major intersection is nothing more than a four-way stop. It's 1977, give or take, and it's a beautiful afternoon as far as I remember. The sun is shining, and I'm playing by myself in my mamaw's front lawn. The neighbor's grandkids, whom I don't know and are older than me, they're a brother and sister pair, they are out in their grandmother's yard too. I'm not sure why they felt like picking on me that morning. That's what we called bullying back then. But on that day, some 44 years ago, they decided to interrogate my 4-year-old self. "You're not a boy," I can still hear him say. "I am too," I reply. "Nah, you're a girl," he says. "I'm a boy," I emphatically declare. And I don't actually know how long this goes on back and forth until his sister walks up and says, "Prove it." Under that warm Arkansas sun, I freeze. I'm frozen. What do I do? And I'm not exactly sure how a 4-year-old brain processes these kinds of things, but undoubtedly I felt the need to prove that I was a boy, and I unbuttoned my pants, and I dropped them to my knees. And then, the fingers and the howls of laughter, I was ashamed and I was embarrassed. I suppose that I was so embarrassed that I've never shared that story with another soul until today. It's one of my earliest memories, and it's left a mark on me that sticks 44 years later. You see, one of my very first memories is one of not being accepted at face value. This indelible moment of someone else attempting to invalidate me because of my authentic self and being my authentic self, it's followed me for most of my life. There I stood, exposed, quite literally, and defenseless, at 4 years of age and barely old enough to hold my head up at all. I realized that in this life, it would be hard to ever hold it up high. What kind of protection would I actually need to survive here in this place where there wasn't a single stoplight, but populated with over 20 churches? this dry county where buying alcohol was illegal, and in this town where public dancing was outlawed. It was probably on that day, although there could have been many more days, there were certainly many more days that came along after that, where I learned to start masking my true self. By early in the 4th grade, I knew I wasn't like the other boys. By the 5th grade, I knew without a doubt that I was gay. It's the early 80s. I actually have no frame of reference for what that means or what that actually is. All I know is that it's bad. Really, really bad. There are no role models, no Will and Grace or Modern Family, only a fire and brimstone Baptist preacher telling me and everyone that I know that my secret self is depraved. My only protection was to hide large parts of myself and my identity. Is this sounding familiar to any of you out there this morning, I wonder? See, I hid behind all kinds of masks, but my primary strategy was to awe. I worked hard to ensure that I had plenty of accomplishments to dazzle. Through high school and college, I accumulated a list of praiseworthy achievements and accolades, medals, mentions in newspaper articles, even television interviews, but they were all just a mask. None of them actually meant anything to me. As we say in Arkansas and in the South, they were lipstick on the pig. If I added enough glitter, then my secrets, they were safe. All the achievements, they were just part of the show that I was putting on. They were simply distractions. You want to know the truth? I wasn't the best at any of those things. I certainly wasn't the best at what truly mattered. I wasn't the best son, nor was I the hardest studying student. I was a far cry from being a great older brother or even a good older brother. In wrestling with my shame and the exhaustion of carrying on the deception of hiding my true self, I'd become a real bully to my little brothers, to both of whom I apologize sincerely here publicly today. Brad, Brian, I'm sorry. At that time, my world, it was a place of hurt, inevitable pain, and chronic heartbreak. I started to take my beautiful, empathetic heart and compartmentalize every bit of it for protection, becoming a jaded version of my once pure and true nature. I was always just one moment away, just one slip up from being discovered as a gay boy in a place and a time where that was simply unconscionable. So if you'd asked me then who I was, well, one honest answer would have been a fake. There were parts of me that were true that I would have loved for you to see, but many of the parts that I presented were absolutely faking it, like having girlfriends, which was so inauthentic to me that I now feel compelled to publicly apologize to them too. The saddest part is that there's genuine parts of me, that there were genuine parts of me, authentic parts of me that no one knew. My friends, this is the closet. It's the place where we hide our true natures for fear of stepping out into the true light of authenticity. I pause now to ask if you can relate to any of this. Maybe you aren't gay, but are there masks that you are wearing this morning? Is there a part of you that you've hidden away for one reason or another? What is that piece of you that someone told you to put away? Or maybe it was society or norms that were dictating your path and enticing you to make choices that felt against your grain. Did you have to pretend to love medicine because your father wanted you to grow up to be a doctor? Did you have to play like you had a stomach ache so that when you went to that after-school event that you could get out of it so that you wouldn't be bullied? Think for a moment, like really just stop and think for just a moment. What versions of yourself did you have to create to make your way through this life? I also ask you, what parts of yourself are you perhaps still hiding today? While we created versions of ourselves to survive and perhaps actually even thrive against the odds, we now pause to realize that those masks which protected us, they aren't us. We can love them and we can honor the safety and the comfort that they provided, but we also pledge to do the work of recognizing them for what they were. And we vow now to dig deeply, to unearth the essence of our truest selves. The very first principle of Unitarian Universalism tells us that we all have inherent worth and dignity, that we're born with it. We did not have to earn it. We did not have to work for it. You see, we do not need a mask to show up here to this faith. So let's just sit here for a moment knowing that here we can simply be. I selected a reading earlier in the service written 10 years before I was born by the famous black and gay author James Baldwin. He talks about the masks that we fear that we cannot live without and know that we cannot live within. This issue of living inauthentic lives existed long before Baldwin and I struggled with it. Still, sadly, even today, nothing has actually changed all that much. Even with gay marriage being legalized and positive gay role models being more prevalent in the media, today's youth, they still wrestle with the same struggle. Lil Nas X is a 22-year-old record-breaking Billboard artist who grew up in Lithia Springs, Georgia. He came out as gay in 2019, and his song O Town Road went 14 times platinum status and is the highest certified song in history. Lil Nas X made headlines again in the late March of this year with his current song, Montero, Call Me By Your Name. In that song, I want you to listen to these words. In that song, he narrates, "In life, we hide the parts of ourselves we do not want the world to see. We lock them away." Lil Nas X, he dropped a music video to accompany Montero, which rattled many evangelical, conservative religious groups with its overt sexuality, which was precisely his point. You see, systematically in the video, Lil Nas X inverts the very tropes that were used against him and that are used against other LGBT youth who grow up in conservative Christian households. Reverend Jackie Lewis from Middle Collegiate Church in Harper's Bazaar writes of Lil Nas X, "His agenda is freedom. His intention is liberation. And though he might articulate it in a way that ruffles cultural feathers, proclaiming liberation for all people, including queer people, is holy work." Lil Nas X, who grew up not far from here, must not have known of UUCA or Unitarian Universalism. But if he had, he would have found a different kind of preaching, one that celebrated his beauty and his sacred identity, a place where he could have shown up here without having to lock away any part of his true self. We have an opportunity this morning and in the years ahead to make it known that UUCA is a safe place for people like Lil Nas X, for people like me, for people like you. I, much like Lil Nas X, felt that I had to hide a part of myself that I didn't want the world to see, and that I too had to lock it away. From personal experience, I can tell you that pretending to be a straight version of Bryce, it was killing me. It was eating me up inside, and I wonder what I would have been able to have done with my young mind if I hadn't have had to have spent so many brain cycles keeping up the ruse of being like the other boys who liked girls. I was living in a shame spiral, as Brene Brown describes it, and it was getting harder and harder for me to see my way out, but then I did. I didn't exactly come out to my parents and the folks in my little Arkansas town so much as I was outed. It's a story for another time, but I can tell you that it was the best thing to ever happen to me. In hindsight, well, it wasn't on my timing or by my choice. That iron mask that made it so hard to breathe finally came off that day. My outing was public, and the gossip mill back in my small little hometown was running at full capacity. My family, who still had to live there, they felt the worst of it. But for me, living out of state, after that initial turbulence, a world of love opened up to me like I'd never known before. The people that actually mattered the most to me, they began to see me for the first time. And I tell you, they opened their hearts wider, and they loved me harder than I'd ever known. I was finally out. Even as a kid, growing up in a conservative Baptist religion, at the very core of my being, I knew that God had created something amazing that was me, but I felt outnumbered, I felt ganged up on, and as the world, it just relentlessly tried to convince me that I was broken. What a burden it is to believe as a kid that you are damned and you can't do a thing to change it. How I wish I could turn back the clock and tell my fifth grade self and that Baptist preacher, that missionary Baptist preacher at Mount Carmel, that he actually had it all wrong. A sobering survey released last July by the Trevor Project polled 40,000 LGBTQ people between the ages of 13 and 24 and found 40% had seriously considered attempting suicide just within the last year. This isn't the late 70s or 80s when I grew up. This is the struggle of our youth still today. There are too many children who are growing up feeling like they are broken. Some of them probably prayed the same prayers I did as a kid. Jesus, fix me. I would repeatedly ask, why have you made me like this? Even at the youngest age, I knew I was created gay, but what I was hearing in the media, what I was seeing in church, well, none of it made any sense to me. While I no longer think as much from a theist perspective, I do believe that my sexuality and those tough years early in life had purpose. After I accepted myself, the world opened up to me more fully. The successes which I'd had, which felt fake before, now felt more real. And I wanted to try and take that means and do something to help others who were facing the same struggles that I had. 15 years ago, I co-founded Empty Closets, a nonprofit that has provided education, information, peer-to-peer counseling, peer support for over 89,000 individual LGBT youth. But what I want you to know about that is that I could have never been a part of creating that holy work if I hadn't leaned into vulnerability and released the shame that was blocking my potential. We have lost too many people to suicide and even more to mental health struggles for no reason other than bigotry and ignorance. I feel lucky today that I can stand here before you accepted as I am. What a blessing it is, and a blessing that we need to make sure that others know that it's possible to do the same. They are loved as they are, that you are loved as you are. I know that there's no reason to be ashamed of my gay identity, nor embracing my sexual energy, both of which are different but essential and beautiful parts of myself. I can stand here this morning in my own skin, not just stand here, but be invited to preach here because Unitarian Universalism offers in our third principle, acceptance of one another. It is a gift to stand here this morning in your grace, unmasked. So knowing that we love you, knowing that we are safe in our caring of one another, I ask you, can you tap back into your truest self? Can you see the part of you that is inherently worthy and made beautiful? Do you realize that UUCA is a place of grace, of acceptance, and of understanding? I invite you this morning to remember your story and to bring your unabridged self into this moment and into this beloved community. As the poet Rumi said and echoed in the hymn, "Come, come, whoever you are, wanderer, worshiper, lover of leaving, ours is not a caravan of despair. Come." Friends, this has not been a sermon about showing up here with our opinions, our political beliefs, or our microaggressions. I'm talking about showing up here with your whole heart, your open and amazing mind, ready to learn how to live life more fully. It's nuanced, but it's simply a balanced equation. We can show up here authentically and also offer kindness to others who are going to do the same. In closing, I want to share with you that it wasn't in the pew of a revival or while attending summer church camps in Arkansas that I discovered grace. It was in a 137-year-old church called the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Atlanta that my life became filled with your amazing grace. I can never thank you enough, but I can wholeheartedly work to pay it forward by being with you in the work to make ourselves known so that we can provide safety and refuge for others that need our life-saving ministries. Friends, what masks are you wearing today? Are you struggling with something that's holding you back? Maybe you aren't the best sister. Please know that's not who you are. That's just a facet of you, but so is the part of you now working to be a good mother and a better sister. Maybe you're struggling with addiction. Is that your shame? Is that the skeleton that's in your closet? Don't let that struggle be don't hide your struggle. It's simply a facet too of who you are, but so is that part of you that is now a sponsor to someone new to recovery. If you take nothing else from this message today, I hope you will remember this. I tell you today that it is our imperfections that make us sparkle the most. If every single one of us bring those shining pieces of what makes us unique here, then it is then that we will create the UUCA that genuinely glimmers and glitters. Thank you.